Well, good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Matt. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. As you know, we met over the weekend at our usual coffee shop, and we're laying out kind of the next couple of talks, and we finished a series on transitioning to college and college life that we thought was appropriate given that students are packing up and traveling off to college, and we wanted to help them out there. And now that we've done that, we wanted to kind of pull back and realize that the work we do isn't just for college students. It's for everyone that struggles with not achieving a life where they feel like they're thriving, flourishing through productivity or whatever. And a lot of our work is how we get in our own way from doing that. And so we thought today it would be great to return to a formula that you've used in a lot of your work, and even in your it's in your
TED Talk.
That's with about 3.2 million views or so and climbing. And so that's the PAW formula. So I'll stop there and have you explain what that means and why it's so important for understanding what we do in terms of our self-worth and how we get in our way.
Yeah, so just for full attribution, my mentor and friend and researcher, Professor Martin Covington, who used to Berkeley, did a lot of this important groundbreaking work on self-worth theory, specifically of achievement motivation. So self-worth theory is a broad paradigm. It has applications to lots of places. And so it's a very comprehensive theory. It explores how people's thoughts, emotions, motivations is a focal point, but also underlying motivations are beliefs and values. So if you can think of sort of the multi-layers of a human being, I think everybody would say, yeah, there's a thing called a feeling, and there's a thought that's often ephemeral, but there's a belief that's maybe more durable, it lasts longer, it's inherent in my body, and that P equals A equals W. The P stands for performance. So how well I do on something. So that could be getting a performance review, it's the word performance at work, or a grade in a class. That people carry around this idea that performance is equivalent to their ability. So in American society, we often think that the main factor in our performance is our inherent ability, which is largely fixed. So if you've heard this idea of a fixed mindset, which many people have, the mindset from Carol Dweck's work, and Carol Dweck and Marty Covington were close colleagues. But that there's a strong association, and that research has shown that people have this belief, which is often mistaken. But self-worth theory takes it further and says, not only is there an equivalency there in people's ideas and beliefs, but that that our sense of our ability, our self-concept around our abilities, is tantamount or equivalent to our sense of worth, that we gain a sense of worth by our own perceived ability, by how we think other people perceive our ability, and therefore our potential to perform again in the future. So making that a little more concrete, right? We say, oh, I'm good in STEM because I'm sciencey. I think like a scientist, or I'm quantitative. I have this sense of my ability, or I'm not that, right? I'm not a science person, or I'm not good with words. These are inherent fixed beliefs about ourselves that we use to explain our performance. But then we equate that often without awareness with our sense of worth. Do I belong in the university, or do I belong in a certain line of work? Engineers have to think a certain way, or marketing people are verbal, or whatever. And so those beliefs, if we hold them, if they're interrupted, often can create feelings of impostor syndrome, or if we think our performance reveals that we're not able, then we'd want to avoid that, right? We don't want to demonstrate that we're not capable to other people. And so this is a framework that's underlying self-worth theory. It's woven into that in our society at this time, and in our institutions and in our social worlds, frequently people carry around these equations, and we know that empirically people have these beliefs. And then what's been demonstrated is how that set of beliefs is manifest, the consequences of that for engagement, avoidance, anxiety, self-regard, right? Self-worth. And there's a lot of implications then. And that also points to some solutions. And I'd say, just before I turn it back to you, one kind of solution is to recognize that often these beliefs are what's the root cause of our distress, our thoughts, our feelings, our habits, but people don't recognize that. And a lot of the discourse out there would say, oh, change your habit. Well, change a habit but a belief is much different than a habit. A thought is much different than a belief. An emotion follows from a belief, but is not the same thing. So if you really want to make change, you need to think about how to change beliefs, especially beliefs about yourself.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about beliefs to maybe give more examples, just to make it more concrete. Because I think with beliefs, it's
yeah
idea like, okay, but what kind of beliefs are we talking about?
Yeah, the word beliefs are used in a couple different ways. One is belief meaning a weak form of knowledge, like I believe that there is a 10th planet beyond Pluto, and we don't know, but we can conjecture. But there's another kind of use of belief, which is more like this. I would say something. The way I've come to describe it is an embodied thought feeling that's very durable through time.
Mm-hmm.
So one example I use to illustrate this is, and it actually corresponds to it. We were just having a conversation, Matt and I, about jumping out of airplanes and flying. And so you can imagine, you can think, I'm flying through the air, and you've maybe had a dream. You can think that. You can even have a sensation. You kind of feel it, right? But you can't make yourself believe it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that proves they're different things, right? If I can think it and sort of feel it, but not believe it, then they're not the same things. So what is a belief? It's this grounding, fundamental sense, but has a cognitive dimension, right? So it's in your body, you feel it, right? And you notice when you don't believe something. And that's what makes it durable and makes it hard to change. So thoughts are embodied differently than beliefs. Emotions are embodied differently than beliefs. Two of the main ways is they're much more ephemeral. They go through our body very quickly. They're not so stable. And then for me, a value is a belief with a moral or ethical component, some sort of judgment attached to it. So beliefs and values are often talked about in psychological and other literature together. So again, values maybe is more the embodied emotional part. Like we feel values. When we transgress our own values, or someone transgresses ours, we have a physical, emotional reaction.
Yeah, I was thinking, again, trying to just nail down this idea of belief and make it not only concrete, but understandable for those who are watching the video. Walking is, as they say, is controlled falling. You actually you push yourself forward, and there's this moment where you are you're destabilizing yourself, but you have this belief in the ground, and it's the firmament. It's going to support you as you land, and you have belief in your leg and your balance to continue walking. And so that, in a way, is a belief is driving your actions, because and it chooses how you act too. Because if you didn't believe in the ground, you wouldn't walk. You would just stay there because you're frightened because you will fall through the ground, or fall on your face. So but then also these beliefs, they would you say, because this is my understanding, is these beliefs are wrapped up in your sense of worth. Because because you are always trying to affirm or figure out, attain your sense of worth. And we've talked about this, even when you're not conscious of that. It's always going on. So your beliefs revolve around that and determine your actions and even how you think and feel. Is that right?
Right. And then particular kinds of beliefs in particular contexts. So my beliefs about my ability and my beliefs about my worth have a relationship, that one is due to the other, right? My worth comes from my abilities. That is a widely held belief in American society, particularly in what I would call achievement context at work, right? So you're worthy on the team. The person with the highest status on the team is usually the best player, whether they're a jerk or not,
right?
Or they're helpful or whatever. That's kind of an example. Or so that our society conveys that. But you can imagine other contexts where that would not be the case. The same ability, like so you're the great basketball player, but not in, who cares if you're in the ER room as a surgeon? So what? Now that's another ability, but you can imagine a completely different context where abilities don't matter so much. It's more about how you behave. So I've never lived in a monastery, I've been a monk, but I suspect that to the extent that people are judging one another, have value or status, it's not about who has these inherent abilities. And then different societies as a whole might value a work ethic. That's not so much an ability as we typically conceive of it, or we might value someone as their kindness or compassion. I don't think that's the same kind of ability that we're talking about, and that people might be valued and get to gain their sense of worth, and others might perceive them as worthy because of those qualities.
Right.
And so that tells us it's not inevitable, or not in every context would we associate our worth with our ability. But that's not to say that we don't. We definitely do in our society, in this time, in certain contexts. And that matters, that's real. But it's also somewhat malleable. It's not inevitable that we would see ourselves this way.
Right. No, that's good. I mean, I was thinking even about, we're how we look at old people and youth.
Yeah.
As someone who's getting older, you get this,
Every day.
Yeah, there's a temptation to think, oh, I'm done, retire, go off. You don't have value, as much value to the workforce and society as you did previously. Sure. Where in different cultures, in cultures I've been in, like in Kenya and whatnot, where that's not the case at all. I mean, even their language, Swahili, has a dimension of respecting your elders, and there's wisdom, and which we don't have, or we did, but we don't use it much anymore. I mean, even the fact that growing up, I would never even think of calling my friends, my parents' friends, by their first name. They were Mr. and Mrs. or whatever, and that's gone by the wayside. Not to say that's wrong or right. It's just just what we value. But yeah, that's another belief system that there's a cultural dimension. I think we're saying here that
right. And then we internalize that as individuals through enculturation, socialization, which are often unconscious processes. We're not really aware of them. We can gain, and so that matters, because we can say, so a piece that I've added to this equation with P equals A equals W is a term. So Marty would say, for sure, you can not even be aware that you have these beliefs, right? So oftentimes our beliefs inform our expectations, and we realize we have a belief when the expectation is violated. We say, oh, I thought this was going to happen. Well, why is that? Unpack that, introspect. Well, there was a belief about how the world works, or human interactions, or a social institution, or different roles, and then that didn't happen, and then whoa. And so a belief functions to create expectations. And human beings, so this gets back to even the nature of a human organism, we are expectation machines. We do that. We are always anticipating, thinking ahead. And one way I illustrate that is by starting a sentence and most people fill in.
Right.
Okay. You don't even realize you're doing that. We're constantly expecting. Another thing that beliefs do is they provide a lens on reality. They shape and, quote, distort or create what we see. So beliefs are very, very powerful, yet we've been enculturated, so we're not fully aware of them. And so sometimes, and I think it's the case of performance equals ability equals a W, this equation of PAW, people actually don't agree with it, but they believe it. So you can not agree with your own beliefs. And there's a word that I've appropriated from philosophy called an belief, which is a belief that you don't agree with yourself, that you hold yourself. So many people, when I do these sessions on procrastination, I'll introduce this PAW model, but I think it informs impostor syndrome and a lot of other scenarios, avoidance more generally, self-handicapping. They'll initially say, well, right, people should be valued by virtue of their abilities. And I'm like, really? What's your mom's GPA? What was Gandhi's transcript like? Then they said, oh, right. Right, maybe not. You know, but then we often apply it to ourselves. No, I'm not trying to critique them. I'm saying that the point of that little intervention is to say, yes, you're spouting to me a belief that has been conveyed to you and you've internalized. But if you examine your values and beliefs yourself, you realize often there's a disjuncture. Mm-hmm. But I'm not saying that you haven't been socialized. I'm saying exactly that you have. That's why we have to introspect. And there's all kinds of ways we're doing it. And actually, education is one of the main ways that we actually communicate this harmful, false belief about the relationships between our performance, our ability, and our worth. So Princeton students all the time say, you know, I used to be a good STEM student before I got to the university, or I was a good writer before I got to college. So you're locating this inherent ability, writer, STEM, even though you're recognizing that the context has told you something else. They don't say, oh, I'm not prepared for Princeton, or Princeton's not prepared for me, or Berkeley has new expectations, or it's a different culture. And of course I don't know how to do that because I've never been in this culture. They much more often, vast majority of people go to attributing the cause of their difficulties and their successes, by the way, to some inherent ability, not preparation, not skills, not strategy. But if I guide them through a process of reflecting, they will recognize that the resources they use, the prior preparation to the context, the strategies and techniques, the intention and purpose they had when they're engaging in the task, all these things matter. And they dispel this idea that it's a reductive explanation that your performance is simply due to your ability, which is largely unchanging. So why then, because it's so obvious upon reflection, why do so many people hold this view? Well, look around. We love the natural. There's a great movie with Robert Redford. We just love the natural genius, the athlete. We're infatuated with that. IQ tests in the United States. People from other cultures go, what are you talking about? This is absurd. There's another example I was going to give. I'm blanking on it. But so that, here it is. So one time sometimes I'll say, and I'm working with these high performing students. I'll say, who went to a gifted and talented program in school? So they're called GATE. That's a common thing. There's these special programs. You get tested, you select out, then you have a special track in your school. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Matt. And so I said, well, who went to the Works Hard and is Curious program? Why not? Supposedly education values these things. Why don't we have a program for that? We have one for gifted and talented. That is telling people what we value as an institution, as a society. Right? We don't have a program for the things that we purport to value.
Yeah, that was good, because I was going to ask you, because you said how the school system in general, be it high school, K through 12 versus college, perpetuate or reinforce this false belief. And so that was a good example, because I was going to ask you for an example to say, the gifted and talented versus the Works Hard and Curious program. So
can I give you one more?
Please.
Just how it happens.
Yeah.
So I've noticed this in actual language, and I've probably done it. So I'm not projecting on other people or castigating them. So I've noticed and you can follow the P, the A to the W. It's something like, initially we say, oh, those students got good grades. That gets compressed without thinking to being good students. Not the same thing. That's ability, right? Got good grades, performance. Good student is inherent ability, to they're just good. There's a slippery slope from got good grades to good students to just being good. They're the good ones. That's P equals A equals W. Good ones is the worthy ones. That's what self-worth is. I feel I'm good and other people perceive me as that. I see this happening all the time. It's essentializing. And you see it not only in this context. You say people are diagnosed with dyslexia. People are diagnosed. People are dyslexic. That's who they are, right? So they can't read well. Well, there's dyslexics with PhDs. This happens a lot in our thinking. We simplify, we reduce, right? We get down to this we essentialize people.
Can you just, when you say essentialize, again, I'm just trying to make sure that we explain our terms. What do you like? Expound on that idea of like what essentialism, essentializing. What's happening there?
Yeah. So the word essential suggests, there's a process, a mental process where we kind of use one unchanging, largely inherent ability that we project or attribute to somebody as explaining their performance or achievement or their lack thereof. And so there are certain beliefs, and this is built into, if you're familiar with mindset, also with self-worth theory and the POM model, it's not just that people have a belief about ability, but the beliefs have particular characteristics, that they are largely inherent, it may be inherited, largely unchanging, and powerfully causal. They explain things. Right? You could have the first two and say, yeah, those things are unchanging, but they don't cause achievement, and they don't lead to worth, right? But if you have all those things together, and then those beliefs are about your own ability, they're super powerful in influencing our expectations, our interpretations, our projections, our imputation to other people. If I think other people see me through the lens of my abilities and my potential, right? And that would not be unlikely because we live in the society. We just made the case that people hold this view. Then I'm going to be very sensitive to protecting this sense of my ability because I think they think it's inherent in me and it's largely unchanging and it explains my performance and my worth. So you can see that if this human apparatus, this intersentient possibility, we can put thoughts and beliefs into other people and then adopt that perspective back on ourselves, right? And if we have those beliefs, and then we think, oh, I'm going to get rewards or positive evaluations based on that person's beliefs about my ability. That's the root of procrastination. I want to protect, part of the root, protect my perception by them of me. And it's not unrealistic to think that. How did you get into Princeton and get all these resources, or Berkeley and the status? Because somebody said, we think you're smart. Well, that reinforces, right, the set of beliefs and the way they act and operate on us and in society.
Right. Yeah, and you can see how there's just a cascade of
good word
actions or that we take to preserve that sense of self, like we talked about, not going to see professors, not speaking in precept, procrastination, obviously, all these ways that really, again, in order to preserve the sense of self and our worth, that actually are deleterious to growing and becoming the students and employees, managers, entrepreneurs, whatever, professors that we want to be.
I think that's exactly right. I don't think we're aware of how powerful this impulse and drive and need is. And one way I try to communicate that is to use the word. So preserve is a great word. You said preserve self. Let's just call it self-preservation.
Right.
And if people realize, right, probably, arguably to some, the most powerful human drive is self-preservation.
Right.
So if you take that to be, self has two meanings, meaning self-referential, back to me, but it's also the sense of self. And if you look out in the world, I think many, many people are going to great, incredible lengths, sometimes deleterious, counterintuitive effects, efforts to preserve their sense of self, even at the expense of performance or achievement. So, right, they'll avoid going to the professor's office hours to get the information to write the better paper or prepare for the exam in order to preserve the perception of that person, even though it has a negative consequence for their achievement, which they care a lot about. Well, if that's the case, that actually tells us the priority system, the value system. They prioritize the sense of other people's view of their ability more than their actual achievement. That is very counterintuitive to a lot of people. They don't realize that they're doing that.
Sorry, did I cut you off there? There's an example that you give that came to mind where didn't you kind of do an informal poll amongst grad students?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you explain that? That's a good example, I think, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, great. I'd forgotten that. So I was doing a workshop on procrastination for Princeton advanced PhD students. They're in their last year, about to go on the job market. And there's folks on procrastination particularly, and it came out of another workshop, and they specifically asked for it. And there were 11 participants there. And I was trying to illustrate this point that we're talking about now. And I said, how many of you would prefer to be thought of as a genius, to be brilliant, thought of as brilliant in your field and have a poor career, versus be thought of as good and have a good career? So you see there's these two different dimensions. One is the actual achievement. One is the perception of their peers. 10 out of the 11 said they'd rather be thought of as a genius and would sacrifice their actual careers. Now, how real is that? Would they really do that? But these are people, and it was immediate. Boom. Like there was not a whole lot of. So I think PhD programs and rarefied places like the Ivy League really value this, right? So everybody wants to be Goodwill Hunting. We want to be the genius, right? They're valorized, and that's important. We don't see the people behind the scenes that spend 40 years and then get incredible achievement in our endowed chair at Princeton. But so that I was surprised by that. It was mostly a thought experiment, but I didn't expect that many. So the point being is there's a concrete thought experiment in which we're asking people to express their values in a kind of up-down vote. And that construction of that thought experiment puts in competition, so to speak, achievement versus the perception of ability. And so I'm forcing them to make a trade-off, and they choose perception of ability. Now, and again, just to be clear, I'm not judging them. I'm not saying that's negative, in a value sense. I could say there's ways that could be very unhelpful in your life.
Right. No, and I think that's the way. I mean, I think I'm probably more comfortable, not judging them, but just saying, is this really the life you want to live?
Right.
Let's be honest here. And your dependence on what you think other people think of you, and how confining, restricting that is. And that was one of my messages I would try to convey to students when I was there was, if you're so worried about other people, well, you have to realize other people are really worried about what you think of them, so they're not even, they're most likely in your mind as the way you have other people in your mind as some measure, some barometer.
Often a foil, a very one-dimensional or two-dimensional foil that reflects back on you in some way.
Yeah, so you're like almost depersonalized and become this measure. I'm fumbling for words as usual, but and isn't that telling? Do you really want someone who doesn't, in the end, is doing
and
they're
that? Kind of objectifying you. They don't have your.
Objectifying is a good word. Yeah, that's a good word to put it.
Well, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe you're going to go here too. From a psychological point of view, I use the word helpful, and you said, I think you were saying, what's a fantastic question is where we want to go in Vogue Academy, which is, but is that contributing to the life you want to lead, which is an ethical question, right? So empirical psychologists, experimentalists tend not to go there very much, although I can tell you that Marty Covington, the researcher, would be happily to go there, but not necessarily in his published materials in a journal article. And the other, his book, he did talk about that. But I think there's an important difference in the lens that you and I bring. So for the most part, my training is in, okay, what's the psychological consequences of that? How might we intervene? What are the tools? But that's not to say there's not an ethical dimension, which is, and perhaps I think a more profound question that comes from this empirical observation. I am motivated by this. And we can ask, is that helpful? But you can then say, not only is it helpful or whatever, how you want to think about that, but is that the life you want to lead? That was your question, which I would say is in that philosophical or ethical dimension, which I think is crucial. It's just not what I was trained to do. And I think you were. And that's why when we come together, I'm frequently interrupted, like, oh, right. There's that level too.
Right. Well, because I look at it and say, boy, it's this race where the goal is always elusive, and you might grab it for a second, but then it's gone. And so you're constantly trying to manage and do, and so it's just a life of anxiety and despair,
exhaustion, burnout,
exactly, all these things. And it's like, and I think you see it, old people when they get, or people closer to death, they're like, what was I thinking? What was I doing? Or they always talk about, the people who go back to their 50th reunions for high school. And, it's like, back when they're 10th, they're all comparing their achievements. And then the 50th, it gets to the point you're like, well, do I really care about that? Versus other things that are a bit more lasting. Yeah. So that's where I think, I just think it's tragic that we buy into these belief systems that really restrict what we can do, and even saying that's kind of wrong. Who we can be, and just a life that's full of curiosity and joy and wonder, versus anxiety, fear, and play to what we perceive are other people's expectations. So that's where I.
Well, I think there's a word I don't think we've used yet, which is experience. And I don't mean experience like you're old and you get experience. I mean the experience, the phenomenology. What does it feel like to be alive in the world moment to moment? Is it joy and curiosity and fascination and fulfillment and meaning? Those are experiences. Those are things those are thought feelings that we experience. They're in our bodies, they're in our minds, they're our nervous systems, they're interpersonal. And so our society is often focused on achievements, things that we do outside of ourselves and perceptions. And you're pointing out, I've had a few experiences of success that didn't last very long. And there's a term for that in the study of thriving. It's called the hedonic treadmill, that we seek pleasure from achievement versus fulfillment, pleasure or aggrandizement or approval. And that doesn't last very long. So mostly we're in a state of the gap between striving for this thing and not having it. And that feels inevitable, but actually it follows from what your objectives and your motivations are. If your aspiration is to be fulfilled, to have meaning, to be impactful, those things can be achieved and experienced every day, every moment, conceivably. Whereas if you set concrete, smart goals, right? They're smart in some sense, and that they're concrete and predictable in their forecast, but you're often experiencing a gap. And I'm not telling people not to be ambitious. But why we're ambitious, how we set our aspirations, really can matter to this experience. And so I think you and I, we've been in these rarefied places. There's a lot of unhappy, highly accomplished people. I mean, if people don't know that, I'm here to tell you. I'm not saying I'm one of them, but I'm not so highly accomplished. I think we know that. And that seems perplexing, but that's because the belief is that achievement will lead to happiness.
Right. And just for folks watching this video, I know where Nick lives, and so he actually was pointing to Princeton University when he went out the window.
That's funny. I didn't even realize I was doing that.
No, that's fine. I would go like this.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
We live on the opposite side of town. All right, so this sounds great, and it's like, yes, I want to live a life of wonder, where I'm experiencing wonder and
Joy.
And as we said, it doesn't mean you're just sell all your goods and live up on the mountaintop. It can be in the grind of everyday life that you can experience this, but there is a cost. Like, the whole world is geared, constructed, at least our society, to reward and to, in a sense, sell you the idea that yes, we will reward your achievements. So to break from that is really, really hard.
Sure.
And so what do you, and that, and both of us worked with college students, and I've worked, you've managed professionals, as I have. And so how have you worked to help people kind of awaken, one, to the PAW type of formula, and and how they're restricting themselves, and how they might try to change that?
I think there's a few steps, and you know them because they're embedded in all of our programming. So one is to look at various traditions, wisdom traditions, whether that be philosophical traditions or practice traditions and mystical and monastic traditions, or from the empirical research and the social motivation or human psychology, and to try to gain a more accurate understanding of what it means to be a human being in the human condition. And there's really good sources of knowledge about that. There's wisdom traditions, there's empirical traditions, they tend not to be on TikTok. I don't know if the Buddha had a really powerful, strong following on Instagram. I think not. But so that's one move. It's like, okay, there's some useful knowledge. I'm not saying it's all the answer, but probably it's not through a influencer. So we're immersed in that, right? It's probably not in a commercial, right? Understandable, but we need to, number one, to see. So we develop some knowledge that provides a lens to introspect and retrospect, reflect. And so I can guide some students to think about, when did you actually have fulfillment in your academic work? What was really the stuff that meant a lot to you? When did you actually perform the best? When did you grow? And people are often surprised. And I was focused on grades as an undergrad. But as I look back, the moments that I can remember were when I was motivated to do something that I cared about and was interested in, and actually did the best too, and took risks and didn't even realize it. I just did it because I had this thing. So this intrinsic motivation, and also deeply internalized motivations like values, the desire to altruistic values, desire to be impactful, to have a cause bigger than yourself. So we can gain awareness that, oh, that's a more accurate understanding of human beings. Then I can use that to look inside. Well, what really motivates me? What do I deeply care about? And then I can consciously and intentionally tap into that. And then, so that's kind of self-knowledge. Then there's the awareness, the moment-to-moment, day-to-day phenomenology of what's operating in me. What am I experiencing right now? Is this how I want to be? Is this how I want to act? Is this an expression of my values and beliefs? How would I create conditions where I'm actually working toward aspirations and values that I care about? And so I think that's a hard thing to do. But we might make choices too. What's we talk about institutional culture or company culture, but we might talk about values. Like, what's the alignment? And I might choose a job concretely that's a closer alignment, or that I feel I can impact more so than a little more money or more status. Because I have an awareness that value alignment actually is really crucial to not burning out and to feeling fulfillment. And so that's a practical decision that is based upon an understanding of human beings. We are not only willing to power and status and wealth. We have that, some more than others, but many of us, as Viktor Frankl said, have a will to meaning. Mm-hmm. He would argue is the most powerful. well, self-worth theory suggests it's more about a sense of worth, being seen as good, ethical. But I think we can explore those and recognize, we're not a bundle of habits. I'm not just my dopamine levels, right? It's more complicated than that.
Right.
And that with knowledge and then self-awareness, I can make choices, I can create conditions for myself that are more in alignment with these wisdom traditions that are often reflected, as you pointed out, in people who gain some clarity near the end of their life and they look back and say, what was I thinking? And I would say to people, don't be judgmental of that. There's a good reason why you're thinking that. Human beings are susceptible to these, and our society sends these messages, and people that sell things for a living tap into your insecurities and your fears and your aspirations. They're doing that on purpose. It's not surprising that we have internalized these things. So I don't know, is that practical enough, or is it we want to go further?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say how, because I've been thinking about this a lot. And this goes back to Kierkegaard, because he really struggled with this. Like, he felt like people are so immersed in their lived world that they're not even aware that they have a self, even though it's always there, it's always operative. They're just unaware of themselves. So, and if you're not aware of yourself in that regard, then you're prey to how you've created, these fear-based adaptations, these maladaptions. And so, but in doing that, you've become somewhat comfortable. Like I'm sure psychologists and psychiatrists really struggle, because a lot of their patients, even though the way they've constructed their way of being is so harmful to themselves, it's what they know, and letting that go is really hard. So in the same way with students, it has been rewarded. They made it into Princeton, they got that great internship, they got that great job, they got into grad school. So it's like, what do you mean? Like, they got me this far. I mean, so how could this be bad? Because society, in a way, has rewarded them, and it's told them over and over again, you're amazing, you're great, you're the elite, you're the gifted and talented, right? So that's hard. So how do you create these moments where they can be kind of awakened to themselves? And I mean, I can't say I did have students I talked with who kind of were like, wow, like, I mean, one thing I used to tell students, and again, I'm just trying to think, we're getting back to our first ever talk we did was self-awareness, and how do we create self-awareness? And I would say to students, and I've done it to folks that I've managed in my various jobs, there's only one person you go through life with. And they're like, what? I mean, like, there's only one person you go through life with. Who is that? And, and then people would realize, like, oh, myself. And then my next question is, well, do you like yourself? And it was interesting with a lot of college students. They would say, no, they don't like themselves. And so, like, how tragic that they're going through life and they're always carrying around this baggage or this self that they don't like. And so they're struggling, but they've been given this formula or this regimen of how to improve or be themselves that's not working. But again, it's been rewarded. So they just buy into it. And so to say, no, there's a different path, the road less traveled, let's say, it's a hard sell, but it's down that path that, life becomes, as we said, more wonderful, filled with awe, excitement, joy, but it's not necessarily a life that's rewarded by society. And so it's tough, but again, I think that's where you don't. Yeah, I think with the way I would put it, there's a life that's, and this sounds judgmental, but there's a life that's based on really fear and playing it safe, and that's a path that society is going to reward. Versus there's a life that's really filled with wonder and curiosity and excitement, I think. But it's not like you're necessarily traveling the world. It's just, it can be in the most mundane, everyday life that you can experience joy and meaning. And I think that's a life that's, our work will hopefully push more people down that path, because your studies can be really that much more enjoyable, and not just something, a hoop or a grind, or something. It can be, it doesn't become so instrumentalized to these getting this great job or whatever, because once you get that great job, you realize that's just one more mountain. There's more mountains to follow, and you've got years ahead of you. So what do you do now? So I don't know, I'm kind of babbling, but
well, there's a few. I mean, I just want to come back to the first thing. I think it's how might we open up the possibility of seeing ourselves in a little different way? So there's and gaining this awareness, and then with that, I kind of think of it as a opening that provides a little light that allows us to have a vantage point on our thoughts, our feelings, our motivations, and beliefs. So in Buddhism, we say one of the things is you're not your beliefs. So you may have seen the bumper sticker, "Don't believe everything you think." Right. So we have thoughts, we have feelings, but there is a sentient, aware, I won't say self, but I'm going to say being, and I'm going to get into why I say that can observe that and say, "Oh, I am having emotions. I am thinking something. I have beliefs, but I am not those beliefs. I'm not reduced to that. Those are not coterminous." And so I can recognize that I have a motivation, an impulse to do something, but I don't have to act on it. It's not inevitable. It is not the sum of what I am, not only in the moment, but ever. And that to me is one of the starting places to crack this open. And then to say, we might ask, and we've been discussing, where does that belief come from? Why am I motivated to do this? Is this what I want to be motivated by? And at least initially, in a non-judgmental way, I think it's just practically useful. And ultimately, we have values and we will apply them. So it's not that we never apply value. That's not my position. But I think for the purposes of gaining an analytical lens and to deeply understand something, sometimes a judgment can actually inhibit that and prevent it. Plus, it often leads to shame and guilt, and those really shut down people's actions. So I think, from that point of view, that's a starting point. And then what I heard you saying, and then I can say, okay, understandably, as a young person, or, and that could be any age really, but I've internalized these things, but are they the ones that I want to hold on to? Are these the ones I want to prioritize and hold up at whatever age you're at, whether it's 18 or 48 or whatever? And then try to make some choices that reflect your well-considered, truly experienced values. And I think then trying to align your actions to that. And so that may be abstract, but it's also super practical. Like that's what a life well lived comes from. I think the wisdom traditions tell us that. And you align your actions with your values. Well, I think there's a discussion in the literature, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, kind of talks about that actually, but not so much how do you get there. It sort of assumes your values and you can disentangle them from societal messages, and then you can, by writing them down and putting them in a quadrant, you can choose those actions. I think it's more complicated than that. I think we have impulses and habits and feelings, and we're unaware of some dynamics. There's motivations, they're in conflict, and so we are complex beings, and the world is complicated. But if I look around, I see people making good choices. I see people living in alignment. I see people who have meaningful, fulfilling work. Some of them are quite successful in conventional ways. Some are not.
Right.
I certainly notice that often people who are super successful in conventional ways, if you ask them what they're doing, isn't what other people think they're doing. So my understanding is Jeff Bezos, he's not trying to make a bunch of money. That just follows from what he's trying to change the world. Hopefully he believes for the better. I'm not going to make a judgment about that at the moment. But if you say, well, what are they trying to do? What was Steve Jobs trying to do? I mean, people notice these things, but is that actually what was motivating them? So I'm just going to stop you. There's a great example of this. I was just in this hallway the other day on Princeton's campus, and there's a plaque. So it's named after somebody, and there's a plaque with his name on it, and then there's a descriptor by his friends saying, hey, we dedicate this to this person, this man. and then it describes him in these qualities. He's curious and fun-loving and all these things. Well, I looked him up. I'm like, oh, who's this guy? I never heard of him. And there's a description of his bio. He achieved this. He was on this board. And I was like, oh, what a fascinating comparison.
Right.
The people that knew him described it in this way. From the world outside, he'd done all these things, these achievements, and he had this net worth, and he started that company, and he was the board of directors of that. And I thought, how fascinating, right? They're right in front of us. And they were so different, these descriptions. And I thought, okay, I get this guy. And then I seen that around, whether it's Steph Curry for the joy of fun. Have you ever seen him more of shooting the basketball and playing, or, that's another place. No, people count the number of rings and achieve, but is that what's motivating him day to day? Is that what his experience is? Is that what's going on? And so I think these things can be reconciled in various ways, but my experience, again, just to come back, because you said, we're not saying go live on a mountaintop, or you don't necessarily have to do that. But what I see is people who are highly achieving, and people have a need to achieve. That's fundamental to self-worth theory, but they're often motivated to achieve by reasons that people from the outside don't recognize. They don't realize, and that are even not attributed to them. It's usually curiosity, impact, to improve the world, by fascination. Read the stories of these Nobel Prize winners. They're not talking about, I was trying to get this prize. They never talk about that.
Yeah. So we'll wrap up here and kind of make sure we get to so what. But yeah, I was reminded of one talk we gave, I think at Princeton's eLab, whatever, the entrepreneurial lab, with a bunch of students. And we were trying to kind of make one, just the self-awareness, but also I think it's important to say, when you invest so much in things that are contingent, temporal, that, again, we mentioned this, how elusive that was. That seemed to kind of help folks kind of pause, which leads to the kind of internal deliberation that we're trying to help them. Because and so I think it's important to say, when you invest so much of yourself in, I always say, the things of this world, realize that they are contingent. They're elusive, they're temporal, and you're creating expectations of what they can provide you that far exceed what they can. And I think that's important. Even when we say we want to have, I'm a little nervous, or maybe this is where a point where we disagree, is like when you want to have impact and achievement, the ways those are evaluated, that needs to be evaluated, because there's that can lead to burnout. Like if you're not having the impact that you want. I mean, I know just from the Christian world, like there's pastors who are so burned out because they've invested so much and they're not getting what they need back. Well, I'm like, well, what expectations are you holding that it creates that the possibility of burnout? So anyway, we can talk about that another time. So anyway, just I just want to again, we wanted to so what's the big deal? Maybe that's just rewatch the whole video, but if you had any last thoughts that try to make this as practical as possible.
Well, the so what of the PAW model of beliefs is that people this is commonly observed, that people carry around these sets of interlocking beliefs. So you probably do as an American citizen, and that these beliefs on the one hand are just not accurate. Beliefs about ability. Upon reflection, most people do not agree with the equation in terms of their worth. We could even put in question whether performance is a reflection of ability, and that gaining awareness is a practical strategy. That is a strategy, and is not only the first, is often the most powerful. But awareness from what vantage point? You need some knowledge that's where the empirical research in this case comes from. And then with that lens, we have some possibility of action and choice, and help us make alignment. So I do think that there are a few things more useful than a good theory. And so in that sense, it's practical. I think maybe another sense of practicality is it's hopefully provides some hope, and hope is very practical too. Like, I can do something. Beliefs are powerful, but not inevitable.
Sorry, I got a call right there.
No problem. You're
Yeah.
open.
Yeah, I was thinking that, we talked about this just as my last thoughts and practical application, like this is a road less traveled, and it can feel lonely. And as much as what we're saying, this kind of achievement motivation that's not healthy is based on fears. It is frightening to travel down this road less traveled, because most of society is thinking differently, and will tend to reward you based on achievements and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to find some ways to get support or help, be it through just reading wisdom tradition, which both of us do in our respective ways, you through Buddhism and me through my work with Kierkegaard and contemplative Christianity. But in addition to that, are there people that emulate what we've been trying to advocate for? And if there's people in your life like that, talk with them, like they allow them to be mentors. I think that's really important, because you don't have to go this alone or try to figure everything out. There's plenty of people throughout history who have gone down this road. I think there's a comfort in knowing that, but also they've made mistakes, and hopefully they're open to that and they're willing to talk with that. And that can be, if that's someone in your life, fantastic. I would really say reach out to them and see if can be a mentor toward you.
Yeah, they'll provide practical wisdom. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Great. Okay. So that was great, Nick. Thanks so much. Really, I think that the Paul formula is really powerful. And so again, I'll put it on the screen here so folks can have it. And until next week.
Thanks, Matt. It was really fun.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.